for being here. Really appreciate you all. So welcome. We are really excited to have Natalie Cunningham here today. For those of you who are newer to our community forums here, welcome. My name is Zitzi Miraker. I am a member here of the Lexington League of Women Voters. And Jen noted that the forum is being recorded. So just wanted to give you all a heads up about that. So you all may already know that the Kentucky Center for Economic Policy produces analyses of key issues and policy options. They promote public conversation about solutions through media and communications, and they advocate to decision makers on the need for policies that improve the lives of all Kentuckians. I didn't realize how new or young the center was. It was launched in 2011 and has really grown into an influential voice in the Kentucky policy landscape. Representing the center, is that, Natalie, you can correct how I'm calling it.
We say KY policy, we say KY policy, but.
KY policy is Natalie Cunningham. Thank you so much, Natalie, for being here. Natalie is the outreach director and joined the staff in July of 2019. She's previously worked as the marketing and special events coordinator for the Kentucky Small Business Development Center and the executive director of Local First Lexington. Natalie received her bachelor's degree in public relations from Murray State. So welcome, Natalie. I'm going to turn it over to you. Let us know if you have any trouble, and we're looking forward to hearing from you and having a conversation.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And once I go to screen share, I'm going to have a hard time seeing your faces. So please come off mute and stop me. I also have a very prepared presentation. So again, please come off mute and shout to stop me, because once I press play, that's pretty much how we're going to go through. But also, this is a pretty small group. And if you've seen KY policy present on this before, this hopefully will not be news to you. But you know, we'll see. So I'm going to go ahead and try to screen share, check in to make sure that you all are seeing a slide and not a whole presentation.
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you for the thumbs up. And let me move this so I can see a little bit better. All right. So the next time the Kentucky State Legislature meets, barring a special session, will be early next year, when it takes on its most important job, which of course is passing a budget. If you don't know, and you all are all in the know, you know that we pass a budget every other year here in Kentucky, and that we're entering into that in 2024. I'm with you today to talk about the devastating impacts of HB 1, which just passed in the 2023 session, which put into law for the first time the explicit goal of eliminating the income tax entirely. A move that would wipe out more than $5 billion, that's billion with a B, dollars in revenue from the state. But before I get into all of that, I think it's important to set the stage and talk a little bit about what's happened to get us here, and to get us to a place where a lot of people would consider many parts of our state government are in crisis. So the good news is, and you might have heard reports, especially I know I've heard them on NPR and a few other places recently, that we're in a good place. The good news is that we have a real opportunity right now to make up for some of the bad budget cuts and failures to adequately fund so many areas of our state government. As this chart illustrates, before the last 3 years, Kentucky never had much of a budget reserve trust fund, or what you'll often hear it called as the rainy day fund, which means that every year until recently, revenues haven't been sufficient to save anything. But this isn't true right now. And the big question legislature is facing is what should be done with the extra money, which, as I'll explain in more detail later, is not sustainable over time. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about where we are with the budget and our needs. I'm going to highlight just a few areas that are important, but there are many more that we're not even going to have time to cover. And many parts of our state agencies that are completely underfunded and unable to work effectively. Let's see if this slide, there we go. Beginning with our largest general fund expenditure area, which is P through 12 education, we can see a trend of lack of investment. This slide shows how much the state contribution to fund P through 12 education has fallen over the past several years when we consider inflation. So this is a big factor. For everything that I'm going to show you, it is considering inflation. Our schools are funded with a combination of state and local dollars. The state provides a larger share to school districts that have less capacity to raise revenues locally to help ensure that those resources are comparable across the state. So what happens when the state doesn't do its share? We'll go to the next slide to find out. This slide shows us that because the state had failed to invest, the gap that existed between poor and wealthy school districts regarding how much they can spend per student is almost back to where it was when the entire system was declared unconstitutional by the Kentucky Supreme Court. So if you don't know, we have the system we have now because back in the 90s, they were taken to court, the state was, because it was unconstitutional how we were funding our schools. And we are at this point, as this chart shows, almost back to that same level of inequity. There are many reasons why we're here, but in short, when the state fails to invest, then it's left up to local school boards and their ability to raise revenues based on the same efforts varies significantly, and so the disparities grow. An example here is that in Fayette County, when the board adds 1 cent to the property tax levy, they can raise $10 million. So Fayette County, the board adds 1 cent to the property tax levy, they can raise $10 million in a year. When the school board in Martin County adds the same penny, they can only raise $500,000. So we're looking at the same effort with vastly different results from county to county. And so the state really has to pick up that investment and that need, and they're not doing their job in that area right now. The lack of state investment also has also impacted teacher salaries, which vary significantly across school districts. As illustrated in this slide, teachers have lost an average of over $9,000 taking inflation into account. And so we've heard a lot about teacher raises of the last year. Our governor promised them. There's been a lot of work trying to, get raises for teachers. But even with all of that, it's still not meeting inflation, and they're still losing out. We've also seen an impact in higher education spending, with a reduction of 26% since 2008, and a commensurate explosion of student debt, where those college students are now having to bear that burden. What this graph shows is the decline of state funding compared to the increase borne by the students. And I think this is just really important when we had this big conversation last year about student debt and how a lot of people feel like it's just part of it, just bear it. But when you look at charts like this, you can see that those expenditures have really, really added incredible burdens onto students who are just trying to get through school. Kentucky has had a serious shortage of affordable childcare options for many years, a situation that's made significantly worse by the pandemic. In recognition of the impact on childcare, a large amount of federal support was provided through ARPA to prop up childcare facilities so parents could continue to work. The funding runs out in 2024, and without additional state investment, many of the facilities that were able to stay open are likely to close their doors. And this is a funding gap that is really terrifying for our entire workforce, for our families, and the state's trying, but as we continue to lose income tax and other sources of revenue, we're not going to be able to fill the gap that the federal government has really helped us out with over the past couple of years. So all of this underinvestment has resulted in our state workforce that is 1/3 smaller than it was in 1991. Despite a significant increase in the number of people who need help from the state, employees who remain on the job shoulder larger burdens and many experience burnout. The lack of salary increase, reduction in pension benefits, and increase in insurance costs have all contributed to the inability of the state to hire enough people. We also have people living in tents, storage sheds, and temporary housing in eastern Kentucky, and a juvenile justice system that is in an absolute crisis due to chronic and severe understaffing. The crisis-ridden juvenile detention system was one of the only pressing budgetary needs to be addressed by this year's legislature by the passage of HB 3. But they were tight-fisted beyond that, even holding back some funds already appropriated for employee raises and state park renovations. As I said when I started this portion of the presentation, I've described just a few of the unmet needs in our state, and I could spend the entire presentation talking about what hasn't been funded and what the impacts of that has been to everyone, to all of us. But instead, we'll switch our focus to tell you about the impact of cutting income tax in a plan that started with HB 8 from last year and has continued to HB 1 of this year and will continue for several years. One of the actions the legislature took last year to help offset the revenue loss was to expand the sales tax over 30 new services. What this slide illustrates is that overall taxes like the sales tax hurt poorer people more than wealthy people because people with fewer resources have to spend more of what they have to simply live from day to day. This type of tax is called regressive because of this. On the other hand, the income tax illustrated in orange here is much less of a burden on people with lower incomes because in Kentucky, people below the poverty line do not pay income taxes. And because the burden is less when the income is less. Taxes that impact people in this way are called progressive taxes for that reason. Are there any questions on that? I do feel like I could stop here if there's any questions.
Natalie, I was wondering if you could tell us about, so what are the kinds of things that we pay sales tax on?
Oh, we pay well, I can tell you what we don't pay sales tax on, because we pay sales tax on everything that we consume, but we do not pay sales tax on groceries or medicine. So for Kentucky's tax system, those are the holy two things that we do not pay taxes on. There's been, trying to promote, the cutting out of the pink tax by not paying taxes on menstrual cycle stuff and all of that. But we pay consumption taxes on everything. And so what we're trying to say and let people know is when your system is based primarily on consumption taxes, then the people that have to spend more of their earnings on just to survive are paying more of their paycheck in taxes.
Right.
So, yeah. I'm almost going into, I was like, I'm stopping myself from going into local taxation to go to the next slide. Because we pay taxes on, let's see, well, we'll come back. I'm going to come back to you in a second as well. So as I said earlier, for the first time, HB 1, so House Bill 1 from this year, explicitly states that the General Assembly's clear intent to expand the regressive taxes and shift the burden away from those who have the most to those who have the least, and to completely do away with our income tax. So what you need to, more important than anything else you need to know is that our income tax makes up 41% of our entire state revenues. So by zeroing out the income tax, we are asking to zero out 41% of our current revenues, of our current resources. This is a huge shift. So this slide illustrates the impact of those cuts and that have already happened. So as you can see, most people are paying more through expansion of sales tax base, with only the wealthiest paying less. So over here, those making the lowest 20%, which is $20,000 or less, are going to be paying $95 more over time because of this shift. Whereas over here on the top percent, of course, they're paying $6,000 less over time because of this shift. I keep saying over time, I think it's 1 year. We can be more explicit. So, as I mentioned previously, the extra money we have now is temporary and will not continue into the future. Yet the proposed tax cuts are permanent and will continue into the future, even as revenues go down, leaving even less money to make up for past cuts and investment in our future. And Kentucky's not alone in the unprecedented revenues. So know that you may hear that Kentucky has all of these extra revenues because of the tax cut that didn't go into effect until this year. But states across the U.S. are really feeling great right now because ARPA funds have really bolstered their coffers, as well as the lowest unemployment and the highest inflation we've seen in 40 years. Both of those things are really propping up budgets across the country and making it look like we're really plush when these things are going to go away, like we talked about, that childcare money and everything else. Regrets. I love this slide. I think it's silly. So what's the plan? HB 8 from last session set up a structure that will result in a reduction in the state income tax rate by a 0.5 percentage point each year conditions are met. So there is an algorithm, there are conditions that have to be met every year for us to go down another 0.5 percentage point. But a lot of those triggers are tied to the rainy day fund, which has been incredibly altered over the last couple of years. We see, like in the, I think it was the second slide, that it's only been the last 3 years we have this crazy rainy day fund, and it's tied to, that is what a lot of these factors are tied to. So the triggers are based on a static, backward-looking 1-year snapshot. And this slide sets forth the conditions that must be met based on the conditions established in HB 8 at the beginning of the year. So we started out this with a 5% rate. Our legislators will tell you it actually started out when they took it from 6 down to 5%, I think in 2018, 2016, somewhere in there. And then we started at 5%. We went down to 4.5% in January. So that was the first step. And then they voted in HB 1 to continue. So now January of 24 will be at a 4% tax rate. 1% change doesn't sound like a lot, but we've gone through, and I think we'll continue to go through, how it's $1 billion in 1% tax change. And it does have a lot to do, it has a lot of impacts on our state.
Natalie, I had a question.
Yeah.
So you said that so they have to meet requirements to reduce the rate, but so let's say they don't meet the requirements. Is there any mechanism that they would increase? Like if maybe they got down to 3%, like, but then the coffers are empty, is there a mechanism that it automatically might go back up to 3.5% or up to 4 or 5%?
I love that question. And the answer is no. There absolutely is not a mechanism to get us back. And if it's real, people don't love paying taxes in general. And it's really hard to raise rates on people once you've walked them down. But the beauty in this is it's all delayed effects. We just got the 0.5% this year. Next year, it's another 0.5%. And so we're going to feel this pain for years to come. And trying to work people backwards to raise their tax rates is going to be the most, nobody wants that. It's going to be really, really, really hard to get us to a place where we're solvent again once we've blown this incredible hole into our budget. And there is no mechanism within the bill to go backwards in that. They can stop, and we will be asking you all to help, and we'll be fighting that fight for the next several years, because they do have to meet these. They do have to vote or have some kind of action to move forward. And so there is places every single year for us to say, please stop cutting, please stop the bleeding. But that there is no requirement to go back. So here's the real kicker, and I've alluded to this, we've talked about it. Once this year's cuts are fully phased in, we will have $1.2 billion less in revenues with no plan to replace them. As you can see in the slide, 35 additional sales taxes are projected to raise $106 million compared to the $594 million we are projected to lose. And that trend continues the following year. We're projected to raise $110 million new dollars from 35 new service taxes. And yet we're still projected to lose that 1.2 billion by the end of 2025. It's real clear that although they can attest that these 35 sales taxes are really going to meet that need, the gap is substantial. So what would $1.2 billion pay for? We want to make sure we put it into context, and that's what this slide illustrates. If revenues aren't replaced, then there will have to be cuts. You know, if they are, our legislators, we heard today, they were talking about how they're not going to add new sales taxes. Like, that's not what they're going to do. But we don't know what their plan is. And so if they're not going to add new sales taxes and we're looking at losing $1 billion, there's going to have to be cuts. And so this chart right here really shows you what we spend and what we, I was trying to point at it and I can't do that from the screen, but what we spend in post-secondary education as a whole in the state of Kentucky does not equal the $1.2 billion we're about to lose. So the question just is what is going to get cut when you have that big of a hole coming? And again, this is who benefits from these tax cuts. Just to revisit who benefits from these proposed cuts, it's mainly the wealthy and not most of us. This slide illustrates who largely is left out. That revenue reduction will come at the benefit of very few. Kentucky workers will only see a tiny change in their paychecks, while those making more than $105,000 annually will receive 2/3 of the cut, and the top 20% of the tax cut will go to the top 1% of Kentucky earners. And the top 1% of Kentucky earners are making $514,000 a year, and they're going to see the top percentage of this tax cut. So just to hit it home that we know who's winning here and why they're pushing it so severely. And no, it won't grow our economy. What we hear most often is that cutting taxes will grow our economy, but real life examples have proven repeatedly that it simply isn't true. Kansas being the most famous of examples, in 2012, Governor Sam Brownback signed into law the Great Kansas Tax Cut Experiment. The law cut $231 million in its first year, and the cuts were projected to total $934 million annually after 6 years. By eliminating taxes on business income and cutting individual income tax rates, Governor Brownback claimed it would be a shot of adrenaline to the heart of the Kansas economy. Instead, it devastated the state. With revenues falling by hundreds of millions of dollars, the state's credit rating was docked twice. Schools were closed early because of insufficient funds, and the governor had to resign. Kansas is an extreme example, but states like Arizona, North Carolina, Ohio, Maine, and Wisconsin have all cut their income taxes and seen lower revenues after doing so. 8 out of the 10 states with the lowest poverty rates and the highest median incomes have income taxes. The 9 states with the highest income taxes are doing as well or better than no income tax states. While wealthy countries are out there experimenting with child stipends for parents, Kentucky is recreating an experiment that has failed from across the country. One thing, when I was looking over this again, it was shocking to me that the 2012 Kansas experiment that we've heard about a whole lot because it was just so devastating, cut taxes by $231 million in the first year. We're looking at losing $1.2 billion in Kentucky. This is substantial and very concerning. Another thing that we often hear is that we should strive to be like our neighbors to the south, but do we really want to be like Tennessee? Tennessee is a poor state like Kentucky at the bottom of life expectancy. And if your family is like mine, you've taken your trip or two to Gatlinburg, and you know that the pros bring their own groceries because it's so darn expensive to buy them down there. And you might ask why, and it's because they've had to resort to incredible sales taxes. They have a nearly 10% sales tax in Tennessee, and it's the sixth most inequitable tax system in the country because they have to tax things like groceries for people, for the state to stay alive, and it's still a poor state. Tennessee also has tourist meccas like Gatlinburg, the Great Smoky Mountains, Graceland, and Memphis, and the bachelor and bachelorette party location of the South, Nashville. Kentucky is a beautiful state with a vibrant tourism industry, but it does not compare to Tennessee's. And yet, still, even with all of those extra natural resources, they're still a poor state. It's a poor state, a sick state with a low life expectancy, and their tax system does not seem to add to the quality life of its citizens. And what better function of our government than to build the best quality of life for the people who live here? If no new revenue is raised, and we simply use the money in our rainy day fund, we're excited, we have this rainy day fund for just this. But if no new revenue is raised and we just use that money, it'll be exhausted in 3 years. And that's if we stay at that 4% income tax rate. We go down further, then that whole rainy day fund is gone a lot quicker. And if new revenues were raised through the sales tax, we'd have the highest rate in the nation. So our legislators say that they're not going to raise the sales tax. We demand, what else are you going to do? Because these 35 service taxes are not meeting the need. And if we were to meet that need by just raising the sales tax, then Kentucky would end up with the highest sales tax in the country. So this is where we are. Revenue is still growing, but a declining rate, which does not bode well for our future. There are so many unmet needs in our Commonwealth, yet our legislature remains on a path where cutting taxes is their #1 priority. HB 1 also put into law for the first time, as I've already said, the explicit goal of eliminating the income tax entirely, which would be a calamitous move that would wipe out more than $5 billion in revenue for the state. Like, it's hard for me to even say it. And how will we replace that? Supporters have put forward no plan for doing so or even identified a feasible option. Fairy tales of resulting mass migration and economic growth are disproven through experiences of states like Kansas. So what can we do? HB 1 already passed and the damage is done, but you can make it clear to your senator and your representative that you want the cutting to stop and that you want them to make investments in the things that we all need to thrive. You can also stand up for the income tax with your friends and colleagues. This is a tactic that I push a lot, that when people are complaining about paying taxes, we can remind each other of what goodness taxes are for our state and how much we need one another to thrive. Regressive income tax cuts hurt those who are already hurting the most in Kentucky and continue to shift our resources to those at the top. So you can learn more at kypolicy.org. This topic will be on our agenda every single legislative session for some time. Because as I said, you know, we are losing a 0.5 percentage point every year. So until we get to 0, we'll be out there saying, please, God, stop. And asking others to join us in doing so. So that's what I had for you all. And I would love to answer questions I can. I am, you know, y'all got second rung here as someone who, is really interested and has learned a heck of a lot about tax policy, but is not one of our nerdy, wonky analysts. So any questions or thoughts on what's happening?
So I had a question, Natalie. Great presentation. I mean, it's like so powerful, just the graphics and things. Because I was thinking about this. I think sometimes it might be hard for somebody to comprehend, like if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you're like, well, it doesn't matter to me whether you tax my income or if you tax when I buy something.
Mm-hmm.
Can you kind of how would you explain that to somebody, like why that does make a difference, just kind of the math of it?
Yeah, sure. So what we look at is, and I'm gonna like look at some charts. How I would say it, how I would go at it, is really talking also about the other side. And so to enter into the conversation that, yes, okay, let's say you are in the middle. You're in the middle, you're making 50 to 60,000. You're doing okay in Kentucky. You're going to get $200 back from this tax cut. So what I've been telling people is you're looking at receiving a grocery trip or two. If you have a family, it's definitely one grocery trip or less if you're paying for anybody, versus the people at the top making the most, getting, I think it was $22,000 a piece back. And so when we compare just those numbers of what you're receiving, even if you're in the middle versus somebody at the very top, and then to say that people that have people that are under the poverty line do not pay income taxes at all. And so if you're under the poverty line, that's not even an option, because you're asking to pay no income tax or to pay a lot more at the grocery store. And I'm saying groceries, let's back up. We are currently not taxing groceries in the state of Kentucky. We hope to never, ever get to that place. But then also checking out, like talking through the fact that if you have more income, like you can just make it real basic. The more income you have, the more income tax you're paying. So, and if they switch that over to, words are leaving my brain altogether. It is late. But if they switch it to sales taxes, then you are paying more no matter what. So the question is, how much, let's look at your paycheck and say what percentage of this is going to stuff that you have to buy to live. And for most people, that's a good percentage of their paycheck. Outside of bills, then if most of you pay your bills and then you pay for the things you have to live, and then you have very little left. Versus the people at the top who are paying very little percentage wise of their paycheck on the things that they have to live on. And so that leaves you spending more of your percentage of your check. So we really like to talk about the percentage of your personal check versus the percentage of someone who's making a whole lot. And then you can also add in the fact that people that are making a whole lot have assets that they're not getting taxed on in general as well. So if they're not selling goods, if they're not even getting a paycheck, they're just living on old money, they're not getting taxed at that same rate. And so it's really the question of who is getting taxed to live. The people at the top are not getting taxed to survive and live. But when we add more taxes on goods, the people that have to purchase those goods to survive and have to spend the gross majority of their check on that are the ones that are holding up those taxes. I feel like I went all over the place. And so I hope I landed on at least a couple of things that made sense.
That totally makes sense. And I guess, the other thing is that if you're super rich, then maybe you're buying stocks or bonds.
Right.
Like your money is going elsewhere. You're going on vacations, I guess. You're spending your money in another country, or like it's not staying here. It's really frightening because and I hear what you're saying, like it's such a hard sell to tell people, like, no, you don't want this tax cut. Like, because everybody's like, of course I want money, right? Like, it's so.
Well, and that's what
so
that's what we
counterintuitive.
hear, you know, through all of January, through all of the last year, we've heard we're giving people their money back. But whose money are you giving back?
Mhm.
And who had money in the system to begin with to give back? And we know that it's the top earners who are getting that money back. And I've even heard the argument of, well, we tax the vice argument, that we tax things we want less of. So why would we tax income if we want less income? And those kinds of things are like, well, you're turning things way crazy to make that happen. But yeah, it is what it is in Kentucky, and we're happy to give presentations like this to talk about it and encourage people to talk to their friends and their neighbors and their colleagues about taxes and not negative ways, which will make you look like a weirdo, and I'm real used to it.
Natalie, this is Sharon Stewart. I was just thinking about how we talk to people. You mentioned this $200 for a lot of people over the course of a year. I was thinking that, that's what, $5 a week, or it's like $15 a month.
Mhm.
If you put it in I was just trying to think of context.
Right.
You're right. You don't want to say groceries or gas or, something that like, yeah, I do want to save that. But if we really, I mean, who doesn't waste, if you want to call us, we do things for pleasure, perhaps, or just,
you could say that if you were in the middle and you're making, if you're in the middle and that $200 a month, you go down to $15 a month, what comes to mind for me is that your Netflix subscription is what you're getting back. And how much more valuable is that in the hands of social workers at the Capitol? How much more valuable is it in Michelle P. waivers or SNAP benefits or Medicaid or Medicare or all of these different things that keep us going? How much more valuable is your Netflix subscription versus teachers being paid properly and being able to care for themselves because they're being paid properly? Those are kind of things that Starbucks every week. Those are things that come to mind if you look.
I'm thinking of things like magazine subscriptions, and I mean there are things that are relatively painless. I think the Starbucks is one example, but yeah, maybe we could come up with sort of a way of talking about it so it brings home how little it really is every week, how it really would not change how we live in any meaningful way.
And honestly, it's not going to change how the people at the top live either. Because if you're making $500,000 a year, that extra $2,000, what are you going to do with that? What does it matter to you if you're making $500,000, nearly $600,000 a year? It's not going to change your life either. It changes no one's life, but it does hurt the state a whole heck of a lot.
So what is are we appealing to the wrong thing then? I mean, what is it that's driving it? And that's what we need to be, I suppose, addressing.
I'm honestly rather perplexed as to how to answer what's driving it, because, we've seen, there was a poll out recently, and this is conversations like this week with colleagues, that there was I think it was an Emerson poll out, and of Republican voters that were voting in the primary, so that's people who really care, their order of issues that matter the most, this was at the bottom. It was not like, the question was, are you for a tax cut that would lead to less revenue? Like it had it worded in a way that did talk about the revenue loss. And the majority of people, I think it was like split in between, it was almost split down the middle, with a few of them not knowing, but it wasn't a majority of people saying we have to have this tax cut. I haven't heard constituents talking about it like it's some big blessing for them. I have heard our lawmakers talking about it in that way, but I really don't know, outside of nefarious reasons, I really don't know what's pushing it, because I don't see it at the ground level. I don't see it in polls as something that's really encouraged, and I don't hear people talking about it as much. I do know that there is messaging out there, that there's people that believe that all taxes are theft. Like there's messaging out there for that, but there are also people who just don't believe in the state as a whole, and we do. We do believe in our democracy and our state and the good that it can do for all of us. But yeah, I just don't know what's pushing it, because I'm just not hearing it from the people. But I do know that states across the country are very adamant about making this happen.
I guess it would be also interesting to kind of highlight, like, okay, maybe you're giving this up personally, but just like you're also, the kids in your community are not getting school books, or, or whatever it is at the school. The teachers are having to pay for, supplies for their classroom out of their own pockets. And, the kids in your community are suffering because you get your extra magazine subscription each month. Like, I mean, it's just, I guess, having.
Well, and your rural hospital is going to be suffering, and there's a lot of services, because I fear that there's been a lot of work against public schooling right now. And so a lot of people can kind of fall back on just the work that's been laid out against our public school system. But there's a lot of services that our state provides for each of us, and for our counties even. Our counties are often very poor and very small and very rural. The state comes in and helps pay, for different services within our counties. The number one employer in the state of Kentucky is the state of Kentucky. But we know that, so when the state's hurting, that means that everyone that's being employed by the state is hurting. That means that no one's getting raises, no one's getting extra staffing that they need. And that's across the board in a lot of places that we all are very vital to all of our lives. Schools, I feel like if you have the right audience, it's a good place to talk about, as we talked about, the incredible burden that college kids are under now. And how, even though our teachers have seen raises, it has in no way kept up with inflation, and they've still across the board lost money over the last decade or so.
It would be great. I would love to have some of these slides and things. We have a relational organizing app. And so we can, post information there and have people share it with their friends. Like that, we pre-write emails for people and text messages, so then they can like send it out. So so that would be great if we could get some of that information, or like if you had particular verbiage that you use in talking about this casually with people, like we can post that to help educate people about this issue, because this is definitely something I know that the League of Women Voters of Kentucky was looking at in this last legislative session and was against, because it's a regressive tax system. And so, and of course, issue education is central to the League's mission. And so, I think, us being able to use the resources that you provide in terms of just the educational component, and then amplifying that, helping you get that information out into the public would be something that would be a great way for us to help.
Yeah, let me talk to the peoples.
Yeah.
Because Zitzi has this presentation in her inbox, but it also has my notes, so I kind of want to exit those out before we make them public, and want to check with our people. But we also run campaigns throughout the General Assembly and before on this topic. Last year we started in September we started. We have a coalition called Kentucky Together that I think I see Cindy Heine in so many different places that it's hard to, I'm pretty sure she comes to Kentucky Together, but I do see her in so many different places that I want to confirm. But because of those campaigns, got resources that I can pretty easily get my hands on and get to you for sure.
Yeah, because even just like, I mean, we just have like a little graphic or something. I mean, even just, we could do a series of different, of different things on our social media. We're always looking for social media content. So,
Well, aren't we all? Oh, look, it's somebody has put Kentucky together on there. I forget we have a website. Look at us. It's old and it's good though. We're still trying. We're still working on it. That coalition is specifically for raising revenues in Kentucky. The whole that coalition is very vast. There's lots of different kinds of organizations in it, but it's all people who are invested in Kentucky having the resources that it needs to survive and thrive and get by. So thank you for so many good questions and for having me. We have several more minutes. I just want to thank you for continuing the conversation.
Nellie,
yeah, this has been grerait.
Yeah,
if
yeah, go ahead.
you can hear me, but this is maybe a crazy question, an unanswerable question, but do you have any idea why the legislature chose to take this action?
I mean, now I can tell you what they say. I know that they I want to believe there are some true believers who really think that the state would be better off and more competitive. That's I feel like that's reasoning they put out there, that we're more competitive for business if we don't have these income taxes. But we know that's not true. We know that other states that have higher income taxes are better off. We don't have any evidence that says that we are actually more competitive without that. But that is one reason that they say they want to. And again, the other thing that I heard a lot during the legislative session was we want to give people their money back. It is election time. Anything before an election year, if you can say you cut taxes in an election year, you're looking real good for November. Anything that I would say is really a guess outside of what they publicly say. And we know that it doesn't end well for most people in Kentucky, but that the people at the top tend to just shift more and more of our resources in that direction. Competitiveness and just giving people back their money is what I've heard. But one of my favorite news reportings on this was someone actually talking about what we've said about it. And then it showed leadership saying we're going to lose $1 billion, and they had no recourse as to how to fix it. And then our Representative Stevenson talking about how we're going to lose $1 billion. Like, I have yet to see how they're planning on, beyond them saying like mass migration, beyond them saying that if we're the state without an income tax, then people are going to move here. And I don't know about y'all, but I've never been wealthy enough that the income tax is what determined where I was going to live or move. I don't know. It may just be my personal experience and that I just haven't been wealthy enough for it to be a factor. But it doesn't, I don't look it up when I think about leaving the state. I look up a lot of different things like healthcare accessibility and housing costs and quality of life and those types of things, but they do expect that this is supposed to get people to move to Kentucky.
Thank you.
You're welcome. It's the best I can do.
Sort of relatedly to Judith's question, Natalie, I'm curious, now that we have sort of a set gubernatorial race, what are our two candidates, so Andy Beshear and Daniel Cameron, what are they saying? Are they publicly, either of them, talking about this issue and what's on their mind?
Again, no, they're not talking about it because it's just not a winner on either side. We discussed that again this week when we were looking at Cameron's acceptance speech. And what you heard from him was a lot of vile and hate towards the governor, but I didn't hear a lot of policy in general. And there definitely wasn't any talk about the income tax. Income taxes in general just aren't a sexy topic. And, but I think it does attest to the fact that people don't care. It's just not, they care, but it's just not at the top of their list of things that are actually personally affecting them. I haven't heard them talk about it. I'm sure they will. And very, the governor did sign this bill into law. It is an election year, and everybody wants to decrease taxes in an election year. And so we understand that that's how things happen. I think there may have been a veto last year, but this time around it was just straight through. So I would hope to hear about important things like the sales tax and income taxes and HB1. I mean, it was so important. It was the #1 priority of this past year within these debates, but I doubt that we will. I just think that they'll sidestep it altogether if they can. Because they know that people just aren't thinking about it. It's just really, for it to be the most important priority of our General Assembly for this year, the constituency is just not there saying it's the most important thing to them. So my best guess is we won't hear about it. You'll hear about it from us. KY Policy will be talking about it.
Great. Any last question?
Natalie, this is Jake McDonald, and I just wanted to thank you so much for the work you do and for coming to speak with us today. This is really interesting and informative, and you're a really clear speaker and very passionate speaker about this really important issue. So just so grateful for you for sharing all that today and for the work we know you're doing every day on this.
Well, thanks so much, Jake. I appreciate it. And good to hear from you again.
Well, thank you, Natalie. Thank you, everyone else, for being here. We really, really appreciate it. This is actually our last community forum I'm on an academic calendar, so for the school year. And we'll be kicking things off again in August with the book club. We'll be meeting on Wednesday, August 16th to read and talk about The New Jim Crow, which is Michelle Alexander's book from a few years ago. So hope to see you there. Thank you again so much, Natalie. We look forward to welcoming you as a member at that meeting.
It's happening this year. I'm going to make it happen.
I also want to mention to people that we have the League of Women Voters of Kentucky's annual meeting coming up, and that's going to be on June 3rd, 2nd and 3rd Friday evening. There's going to be a meet and greet at the Heine Brothers Coffee in Louisville with the members from the national organizing team are going to be there. So it's a great opportunity to kind of like reconvene after the pandemic and kind of like meet league members from across the state. And then that evening there is a Friday dinner program where Joe Girth from the Louisville Courier Journal is going to be having in conversation. There is a fee for that, and registration is limited. So if you're interested in going to that, I would make sure you get your registration in soon. And then on Saturday is going to be like the business part of the meeting. In addition to, we're super excited that Virginia K. Solomon who is the CEO of the National League is going to be there in person. We're also super excited to have Michael Adams and Professor, who's our Secretary of State, and Professor Jasmine Ferrier talking about open primaries and ranked choice voting. And then, of course, during that business meeting, officers get elected and all of that other stuff happens. And then there will be a happy hour it's very close to Lang House. Lang House is the kind of the home of the League of Women Voters of Louisville and Louisville. And so anyway, the meeting will be centralized there. And so these other ancillary events are nearby. So anyway, you can go to the state website at lwvky.org to register, and you just click on the main thing. It'll bring you to this registration page, and we do need voting delegates for Lexington. If you are a league member in Lexington, email Mary at mary.hughes@lwvlexington.org or .com, and let her know you'd like to be a voting delegate. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a great night.
Wonderful program. Thank you, Natalie.
Mhm.